Hi there, my name is Katherine Stanley and I'm a research associate at the University of Manitoba in the plant science department. Today we're going to show you around our crop rotation study that we're doing in collaboration with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, titled Crop Rotations for Productivity, Resilience and Sustainability. Today we're here in Carman, Manitoba. It is July 21st. And this rotation study is one of many throughout the prairie provinces in Canada. And I'll be joined by Dr. Entz, and we'll be running through some of the different examples of the crops grown in this particular experiment.
Okay, thanks for inviting me to come visit your experiment here today, Katherine. So for those of you who may not know me, my name is Entz, and I'm involved in this project together with all the other collaborators. And what I've asked Katherine to do is to walk us through the different crop rotation studies that are being investigated here, and then to show us a little bit about each crop. And I might ask her some questions about the condition of the crop. So let's start with rotation 1, Katherine.
Thanks, Martin. So in rotation 1, it's the first of 7 different rotations we have in this study. We are just looking at a basic rotation that would be very common in the prairies, following nitrogen recommendations based on crop removal. So the first crop that we have in rotation in this particular study is spring wheat.
Okay, could you maybe tell us the whole rotation? I know we're going to see all the crops.
Sure.
What is this rotation?
So this particular rotation is spring wheat followed by soybean, which is then followed by spring wheat and then canola.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the weather here, because this spring wheat crop for July 21st looks pretty stressed.
It definitely does. So as has been pretty common across most of the eastern prairies, it's been incredibly dry this year. We did have a very early start to this crop. We were able to seed it at the end of April, around April 28th. But since then, we've received very little moisture. So throughout the course of the study, from seeding until now, we've received just over 150 millimeters of rain, which is lower than 60% of the average at this time of year. But it's important to keep in mind over half of that actually fell in one single day in a few hour period. So it's possible we haven't even fully had most of that moisture infiltrate into the soil.
Okay, and so when we talk about environmental stress, we also talk about temperature. Mm-hmm. So we've had less than 60% moisture. And I'm assuming the soil moisture there wasn't a lot of soil moisture at planting?
No, yeah, it was very dry.
What about the temperature regime?
And similar to the moisture stress, we've also had extremely high temperatures over the growing season, consistently days over 30 degrees since the beginning of May. So it's been very hot, and it's paired with the lack of moisture. It's been very stressful on the crops in this region.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go see the next crop in the rotation.
All right. The second crop in the rotation. Here we're growing soybeans. They are a Roundup Ready variety, and they have followed wheat, which we grew last year.
And what is your assessment of this crop? I can see it's been no-till seeded, so you probably had good moisture at seeding time?
Yeah, so this crop was no-till seeded right around the middle of May. At that time, we were already starting to experience quite a bit of drought stress and lack of moisture in our seed bed, but that was partially why we tried to seed earlier in the seeding window to be able to capture some of that moisture. So we did have decent emergence, which was at least a head start.
What's the next crop in the rotation that we get to look at?
Following soybeans in this particular rotation, we'll be looking at spring wheat
Okay,
again.
Let's go see it.
Okay. So here we're standing in front of the third crop in the rotation. Also spring wheat following soybeans, and similar to our first spring wheat crop, this was also seeded at the end of April.
Okay. I was wondering, what is the variety of spring wheat you're using in this study?
In this study, we're growing AC Brandon,
okay.
Which is a spring wheat variety that's very commonly grown in this area of Manitoba.
Okay. And great. Well, it looks like a great crop of wheat. Little drought stressed. Thanks for showing it to me. And what's the final crop in the rotation?
The final crop we have to look at in this rotation is canola.
Let's go look at that.
So here we're standing in front of the fourth and final crop in this rotation, which is canola. And in this crop rotation study, we grow a Liberty Link variety of canola.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for a hot, dry year, it's not a bad crop, actually. It's not as big as what we saw last year, I guess. And you also no-till seed this?
Yeah, all the crops in this rotation are no-till seeded.
Okay.
And just on your comment about moisture, again, we had difficult conditions at seeding. We had relatively poor emergence, but the canola has filled in quite nicely and is just about finished flowering.
Okay, thanks. And what kind of a seeding machine do you use here? Is it a no-till disc drill or a no-till hoe drill?
The drill we use in this experiment is a no-till hoe drill. It's an air seeder.
Yeah.
So we can mid-row band all of our fertilizer in this experiment as well.
Okay, thanks a lot. So that's the rotation. So let me remind myself, it's wheat and then soybean and then wheat and then canola.
Correct.
Okay, so now that's one. We're done that one?
Done. Check.
You got that canola, that one done? All right. So what's the next rotation we're going to go visit?
So the next rotation we're going to go visit is very similar, but it's more pulse intensified. So there's more soybeans in this rotation. Wheat, soybean, canola.
Okay, well let's go take a look at that one.
Okay, great. Great. So now we're here. We're going to be looking at the second rotation in our no-till study, which is the pulse or the soybean intensified system. So as I mentioned before, there's 2 phases of soybean in this rotation. And here we are standing in a Roundup ready soybean variety, also no-tilled into canola stubble.
Okay, so looks good. I mean, I guess the interesting thing about soybeans is I remember Paul Porter from the University of Minnesota telling me back when we started growing soybeans is that August rains is what really makes the soybean yield. So we're on July 21st and it's cloudy, although it's also smoky, so don't be fooled. But I guess if we do get some rains going forward, it may actually be a pretty good crop kit.
Exactly. So on Monday, so today's Wednesday, 2 days ago, we received about a half an inch to an inch of rain in this area on the research station. And already within 2 days, the soybeans have really responded to the added moisture.
Okay, and I see they're flowering. But a question I have is the students and the listeners the viewers will want to know about nodulation.
Sure.
So I'm assuming you inoculate these soybeans?
Yes, all the soybeans are inoculated. And at flowering is a great time to check for nodulation. And we can see here that there's quite a few nodules on this crop. And if you slice them open with your fingernail, if I can find enough, they should be pink inside to show you that they're active. Which looks good.
Okay, so we have nodulation on this soybean crop. Great. So it looks like it's doing okay. It's starting to flower, and if we get rains or continue to get rains, it might actually be one of the better crops in the rotation, would you say?
Yeah, I would say that I think at this point, fingers crossed for some more precipitation. The soybeans are still flowering, and we could see some nice full pods in this crop.
Great. Okay, so you said soybean, wheat, soybean, canola?
Yes.
So what do we get to look at next? The wheat?
We'll look at the wheat crop next.
Okay.
So the second crop in this second rotation is spring wheat, and we use the same variety of AC Brandon in all of the different crop rotations.
Okay, so a couple of questions here. I see a little bit of green foxtail weeds, but not many. So one question I have is what did you do for weed control in this system? And secondly, this wheat crop looks a little shorter than the ones that we've looked at, and I wonder if you have an explanation for that.
Sure, I can answer both of those questions. So in Carmen, we do have a very vibrant and healthy population of green and yellow foxtail, which has proven to be a challenge to control in some years. But our dry spring really let us get the spring wheat ahead, and we planted it very early in the hopes to allow the crop to be naturally competitive against any later emerging green and yellow foxtail. And we've also applied in-crop herbicides to this as well. However, a lot of the green and yellow foxtail in the farm has potential resistance to group 1 and 2. So we're really glad that we went for some more cultural weed control strategy in this spring wheat crop. As you can see, it's relatively clean.
Okay, so what I heard you say is that the green foxtail, which is a warm season plant, emerges a bit later, and you planted your wheat early. It's a cool season plant, and then you applied some glyphosate. Maybe not. Maybe you did. I'm not sure.
No.
Okay, so you didn't even need to do that this year. And then the wheat got ahead of that warm season wheat early when it was cool.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a great strategy.
And like you said, doing a pre-emergent application of glyphosate is also one weed control strategy. However, we didn't see very much weed emergence before the wheat crop came up. And I should mention that in addition to early planting, we also increased our seeding rate of wheats to make sure we had a denser canopy.
Okay. Now, my second question kind of related to the dryness of this. This looks like a shorter crop, and the leaves are really browning off. Any explanation?
So one of the benefits of looking at a long-term crop rotation study like this is we're following some similar crops after different crops in the year previous. And as I mentioned, this spring wheat crop follows soybeans, whereas the other spring wheat crop that we looked at followed canola. So canola, there's quite a bit more stubble left in the fall, which is a really great way of trapping snow. Whereas in soybeans in the fall, there's very little crop residue left. So in an extremely water-stressed year, we're really seeing the differences of that little bit of snow trap that we may have had an improved water holding or water retaining capacity from the canola residue.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you're speculating that there was perhaps less snow trapping here and less water.
Yes.
Is there something that a farmer might be able to do after soybeans to increase snow trapping? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot with that question, but could they plant a cover crop, or is there something they could do?
Well, definitely incorporating cover crops into your crop rotation will help with snow trap, but in Manitoba, soybeans are often harvested quite late in the growing season, so that can provide a limited growing window for a dense enough stand to actually trap some snow.
Fair enough.
But I'm not sure, Martin.
Yeah, and I guess soybeans, when they're harvested, everything is cut right to the ground.
Yeah.
So we just have to live with the potential for less snow trapping. So, I guess I'm looking in the distance and seeing trees, and I guess, like shelter belts might be one thing to do, but that's something that we probably need to think about a bit. We certainly don't have that here in this study.
No, we don't have that here, but trees, what I think as well, looking in the long term, including rotations that have higher residue and building up the soil organic matter on the topsoil can help conserve moisture, but not so much on the snow trapping.
Okay, thanks.
So here we're standing in front of our third crop in our second rotation, which again is soybeans, and these soybeans followed spring wheat.
Okay, so just we've got another plot of soybeans there. Could you just tell me how wide and how long each plot is, just so the viewers can kind of see what we're doing?
Sure. So the plots here are 6 meters wide.
Okay.
By 14 meters long.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So we grow larger plots in a rotation study that is intended to be established for the long term. To avoid any edge effects or confounding effects, and it just helps maintain the integrity of the experiment.
Okay, so rotation 2, wheat, soybean, wheat, soybean, and then
canola.
All right, let's go. So let's go look at crop number 4.
Okay. Great. So here we are at the final crop in our second rotation, the soybean intensified rotation, where we're looking at a Liberty canola variety.
Okay, so. Yeah, it looks really good. You've done a great job of getting it established in this year. And I had a question. In these types of rotations where you've got a lot of wheat, a lot of canola, a lot of soybeans, are you using any other pest management systems like fungicides or insecticides to control pests?
We haven't, except for in 2019, which was the first year of the study. We had more humidity and higher moisture in that year, so we did apply some fungicides, particularly in our canola and wheat crops. But the last 2 years, with the incredibly dry conditions, we haven't applied any and haven't seen any adverse effects from those decisions.
Okay, so what you're saying is you apply the fungicide if the conditions warrant applying that foliar fungicide.
Correct.
And okay, great. What about any seed treatments? Are the seeds coated with any insecticide or fungicide?
Yeah. So all of the crops in the rotation or the majority of the crops in the rotation have been seed treated for both insect and other disease issues depending on the crop.
Okay.
Our third crop rotation is canola, winter wheat, soybean, which is then followed by canola. But since we've looked at a lot of canola and soybean so far, we're just going to look at the winter wheat crop in this rotation.
Okay, so winter wheat is often seen as our great hope because it is usually much more water use efficient, and because it grows early in the season, it's heat tolerant. Why does this winter wheat crop looks kind of like, no criticism, but it looks pretty yield limited? Let's put it that way.
I think yield limited is a nice way to put it. Yes, the winter wheat here is very stressed. It's been a stressful almost 12 months for this winter wheat crop. We planted it in the fall of 2020, which was incredibly dry. We had just followed a very dry season and didn't have very much moisture in the fall. And to be completely honest, we had very poor emergence in the fall before freeze up, and I wasn't quite even sure that this crop was going to establish.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you didn't have the best establishment, but yet, when you look down the row, all the plants are there. So maybe some of them, germinated and just didn't produce a plant in the spring, in the fall, and grew in the spring?
I think that could definitely be a possibility.
Okay.
And I think as well, the plants that did emerge acclimatized really well before it froze and before it snowed.
Okay. What variety of winter wheat is this?
Here we're growing Emerson, which is a winter wheat variety, also commonly grown in this area. We, as I mentioned, seeded this in the fall. Again, because it was so dry and not many weeds were emerging, we didn't have a chance to spray this with herbicide in the fall. And similarly, it came up and grew at a stage before we have applied any herbicides in the spring. So this crop hasn't received a single herbicide application.
Okay, so that's really quite interesting. And because it's dry, you didn't add a fungicide.
Correct.
So this would actually qualify as what we call a pesticide-free production crop. So it's had nutrients from fertilizer, but it hasn't had any biocides, any chemicals.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Just by comparison, how have the winter wheat crops grown here in previous years? Or how would this compare to other winter wheat crops on the research farm here?
Sure. I would say the winter wheat and any of our winter and fall cereals that grew in 2019, so that were planted in 2018, those did quite well. They had a lot of moisture to get started, but the last 2 years have been pretty poor, and I would say that this is probably comparable to last year, but not as good as 2019.
Okay, so winter wheat, because it goes through its growth phase, needs good growing conditions early in the year. And then soybean, by comparison, as we saw a few plots ago, it actually needs good growing conditions later in the season.
Exactly.
So by growing winter wheat and soybeans in the same rotation, we might be spreading out our risk.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and one thing we may notice here at harvest, since this crop is already at the soft dough stage, we may have very small seeds because there hasn't been a lot of moisture to allow for the seeds to plump up.
Okay. And I guess if it starts raining now, it's July 21st, this is going to be harvested, in the next 2 weeks? You would have a chance to grow a cover crop here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there is an opportunity in a crop such as winter wheat to plant a cover crop and have a lot of growing days left.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So that's rotation 3. So now we're going to rotation 4. What are we going to get to look at next? Or are you going to keep that a surprise till we get to the
I think we'll keep it a surprise.
Okay. Very good idea.
So this is rotation number 4, which is a very unique rotation in this particular study. Okay. So in the 4th rotation, we actually just wing it every year, and we plant something that either has would be very good economically or good for the growing conditions, something that farmers in the area are interested in growing.
Okay. So This study's been around for 3 years. So what 3 crops have you grown in this wing it rotation?
So in the wing it rotation, this year, as you can see, we have oats planted behind us. And then both of the years prior, we planted corn. So it was corn, and then now we followed it by oats.
Okay, and what's your assessment of the oat crop here?
I think given the conditions, this oat crop looks phenomenal. It's growing really well. We had excellent establishment, germination, and as you can see, there's a few weeds poking up, but we, similar to the winter wheat, have not sprayed this with a single herbicide.
Okay, that's great. So this is another potential pesticide-free production crop.
Yes.
Great. So you had 2 corn crops before this oats. What was it like to seed the oats into the corn residue? And I see you've got some corn residue poking up here. I'm wondering if the camera can move over here and you can just explain, whether there were any problems. Because I'm looking at this, that's a lot of corn residue and there's a lot of animals living under there. But so no problem. I mean, the crop looks like it established pretty well.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of, well, first of all, I should mention, with our combine, we have a straw chopper and spreader on the back.
Okay.
So the really big stalks of corn, it chops them up more into manageable pieces.
Okay.
Our hoe opener on our drill while creates a bit more disturbance than a disc drill, it really does clear the path for good seed to soil contact and limits any risk of hairpinning.
Okay. By the way, not everybody may know what hairpinning is. Could you explain that?
So hairpinning happens when you're seeding a crop, and typically when you're using a disc, it pinches the residue and the seed is almost placed in a little cup of residue, but there's very little contact with the soil.
Okay. And then, what
like a bobby pin. Right in there.
Like a bobby pin. Okay, thanks. So, and I don't know if you know offhand what variety of oat this is. If not, we could have it put on the video at the bottom, but maybe you do.
These are Surus oats.
Surus oats.
Which have been commonly grown on the farm here.
Okay, great. Yeah, good looking crop. And I don't know what oat prices are right now, but I don't think they're too bad.
Yeah.
So, great. So that's rotation 4.
Yes.
So
next up.
What's up next?
Number 5.
What's up on number 5?
So in rotation 5, this rotation is titled High Risk, High Reward. And so we're growing crops that, have the potential to do quite well and economically do quite well, but they're also riskier to grow in this region. Okay. So these crops include corn, pinto bean, canola, and then sunflower.
Okay, looking forward to rotation 5.
Rotation 5.
Okay.
So here we are at the start of rotation 5 with a Roundup Ready corn variety behind us. And this corn was planted into sunflower stubble.
Okay, yeah. So this rotation, you said, includes like corn, sunflower, canola, and dry bean.
Yes.
And so this follows the sunflower, and we can see the stalks here. Do you mind if I pick one up?
No, I don't mind.
Okay. So I'll put it back exactly where I found it. So here's a sunflower stalk, which is falling apart, but I guess that's part of the
process.
Part of the process, right? So no trouble seeding into here with all these stalks?
Well, with the corn, we do use a no-till disc drill.
Okay.
Precision planter for the corn, and in previous years we have had a little bit of issues with hairpinning, like I mentioned before, into the sunflower residue, but this year we seem to be able to manage our depth relatively well. Okay.
And the fertilizer here, is it also mid-row banded, or how do you put your nitrogen on?
This particular rotation, we've actually had to hand broadcast the nitrogen fertilizer. Obviously not the most ideal way of applying nitrogen fertilizer, but due to the limitations of our research equipment, that was necessary for this rotation.
So that's a sort of research-related shortcoming, but normally farmers would mid-row band or something, their nitrogen corn?
There's a couple different ways. Some people would mid-row band or dribble band it beside the row.
Okay. And Very interesting. So knee-high by the 4th of July is what they used to say. I think, was the corn knee-high by the 4th of July? Now it's, of course, much taller.
Yeah. You know, it's a good point. I believe we were at knee-high on the 4th of July. The corn in this rotation, despite it being dry, is actually, it's short. It's for this time of year, but it's standing up relatively well.
Okay, good. So corn, great. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the next crop in the rotation.
So following the corn, we're going to go look at pinto beans.
Great.
So following corn in rotation number 5, we have pinto beans, which are a challenging crop to grow in this area of the research farm.
So pinto beans, so these are like pork and beans. The beans that you eat.
Yes.
Right on your...
Edible beans.
Edible beans, okay. Not soybeans.
Not soybeans.
Not soybeans, okay. So these are phaseolus beans. I think it's pretty obvious that you have a weed problem here. I'm very curious to know why these weeds are growing in this pinto bean field.
We have quite the weedscape here, that is true. There's a number of reasons the weeds are growing like this in this pinto bean field. One is pinto beans as a crop are very non-competitive and very slow to start growing. Secondly, the conditions this year have really allowed the weeds to take advantage of the crop. The pinto beans are seeded later, and as you can see, most of the weeds here are warm season weeds that we haven't been able to manage with the herbicides that we use.
Okay. Now, are these so there are no herbicides to control some of these weeds? I should be more clear. There are herbicides to control these weeds. The herbicides that we have been using, especially with the green and yellow foxtail that you see here, are not able to manage the green and yellow foxtail, being that the green and yellow foxtail do have either resistance or tolerance to those herbicides. Okay, so you've got a herbicide resistance issue here.
Yes.
Just for some people who may not know what green and yellow foxtail looks like, could you maybe just just show us, identify, just pull a head up so people can just see what the plant looks like?
Sure. So these are green foxtail plants. Yellow foxtail looks very similar, except they have very, very fine hairs on them. I always say, like you might find on your grandma's chin.
Okay. So, right. So, all right. So you've got one of the problems here then is that the herbicides are not killing these weeds.
Yes.
But I'm assuming that the herbicides used to kill these weeds when they were first invented. But these have developed resistance, is what you're saying.
These have developed resistance, and to manage that resistance, we do apply and have applied a soil-applied herbicide, a granular herbicide. However, that was very effective in 2020 when we had good precipitation in the spring. The granular herbicides need precipitation to activate.
Okay. And
we hadn't had any precipitation following the planting of this crop, as well as after the application of the granular herbicide.
So could you just review the herbicide regime that was used on this field? Because some people might say, well, you didn't use any herbicides because you got these weeds. But in fact, it sounds like you tried.
Yes. So we've used an edge granular applied herbicide first thing in the spring.
Okay. This spring,
correct.
Okay.
Then we also sprayed glyphosate at least twice before planting and once before planting and once before emergence.
Okay.
And then after emergence, we've sprayed this as well with post. Group 1 Centurion herbicide.
Okay, so 4 herbicide applications.
Yeah.
And this is what we get.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're right. This is a high risk.
It is a very high risk crop. Yes. So if you look at our videos from last year, you'll see that at this time of year, our pinto beans were doing quite well. And last year, they were a very high reward crop.
Ah, okay.
So we definitely see the benefit of including these crops in rotation every year.
Okay. So this year, what I've heard you say is because of the moisture conditions, the same herbicide regime that you used compared to last year just didn't give you the results.
Except we applied more herbicide this year.
Yeah. More risk, less reward.
Last year we didn't apply any herbicide in crop.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we had a really nice corn crop. Well, but there are some pinto beans in here, so there'll be some kind of yield.
There's some in there, yeah.
Okay. What's next?
Following this is a canola crop.
Okay.
So the next crop in this rotation is canola, which we grow after dry bean.
Okay. So looks good. Are you happy with it?
Yeah, I think this crop looks really great. It'll be good to compare them at harvest to other crops like we talked about in soybeans. With dry beans, there's also very little crop residue. So relatively less moisture compared to the canola grown after wheat.
Okay, so corn, dry bean, canola, and then
sunflowers.
Oh, that's a happy plant. Let's go look at that one.
So we're here now in the final crop of the rotation number 5, and we were looking at some sunflowers.
Yeah, nice looking crop. I guess it's not quite giving us the smiley face yet.
Not quite.
Nice yellow, radiant heads. But what are your thoughts about this crop, and what was the management that got you to this point on this crop?
Sure. So with the sunflowers, we historically have run into some of the same issues that we do with the dry beans. So our ability to manage weeds. Even more so than in dry beans, there are very limited herbicide options in sunflower crops. So we do apply a granular herbicide in the spring prior to planting. And we also increased our seeding rates in this experiment. And as you can see, the sunflowers look pretty good, and the heads are about to open up and they're moving with the sun, and it'll be nice, like you said, when they show us their smiling faces.
Right. Now, sunflower is a crop that's dear to my heart because I've done quite a bit of research on it, and what we know from past student projects is that the roots go very deep. So among the crops that we've looked at, I'm thinking, dry bean has the shallowest root, and then soybean has the next shallowest root, and then we're probably looking at canola wheat being tied at about 1.1 or 1.2 meters. Now we know this crop goes down 1.6 meters into the soil. And in a dry year like this, it's very advantageous, right, to go get that water that might be down there?
Yes.
And so my question to you is, has this crop in the weeks leading up to this ever looked drought stressed? Or has this crop looked like it's had enough water?
The sunflower crop has always looked good. And I would say, obviously, that we have depleted our soil moisture reserves in comparison to last year. Yeah. So the crop itself is a little bit smaller than the soybeans, not soybeans, the sunflowers that we grew last year. Yeah. But comparative to other crops grown throughout the study, it looks great.
Right. I mean, the leaves are still very turgid, and they got some holes in them. Something is enjoying them, but they look very turgid and looks really good in that regard.
Yes.
Another question, I don't know if you're quite ready for this question, but it strikes me that this rotation has a lot of sclerotinia susceptible plants, right?
Yeah.
Canola, dry bean, sunflower, all susceptible to sclerotinia. So in the study, are you doing anything to monitor how this rotation's sclerotinia might compare to other rotations' disease sclerotinia?
We monitor the sclerotinia in the canola because that's the most common crop across all the different rotations. We do that closer to harvest. So far, the last number of years, we haven't seen any sclerotinia in the canola crops, but as you mentioned, we're only in the 3rd year of this rotation study. So it'll be interesting to see at the end, or as we move through the entire rotation, if the canola in this particular rotation has more sclerotinia than the other rotations.
And how do you actually measure the sclerotinia in the canola later on in its life?
That we look at the roots and the stem closer to harvest. So we'll take a couple, almost the equivalent of like swathing a small patch of canola and rate the stems.
Okay, so you look at the stems, and that tells you whether you've got the disease at harvest time. Good. So is that it for rotation 5?
That's it for rotation 5.
That was quite exciting. Thank you very much. I mean, if memory serves me correct, there's corn, then dry bean, then canola, and then sunflower.
Yes.
And this is going to be just a trick question. Of those crops, which is your favorite?
I think so far the sunflowers are my favorite. They've been the biggest learning curve for us to figure out how to grow. The first year they were really challenging. But now I'm quite happy with what we've produced here, and last year they did really well, and we're good yielding crops.
Good. Well, congratulations. They look great.
Thank you.
Okay, is that it, or do we have more rotations?
We have more rotations.
Oh,
two more.
Two more. So we have 6 and 7.
6 and 7.
Oh, looking forward to that.
So we're going to move on to rotation 6, which is our green manure incorporated rotation.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so
All right.
I'm going to just jump in here. I'm looking at this and going like, what is this? Is this a barley crop? Is this a weed crop? Is this a purple flowered plant crop? What's going on, and what's this rotation all about?
It looks chaotic at the moment, but it's all part of the plan.
Okay.
So we're here in rotation 6, which is the green manure incorporated, as well as the legume intensified crop rotation.
Oh, I like that. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, so it is a complex rotation, so I'm going to refer to my notes so I don't get anything turned around. Sure. So here we're standing in front of our green manure crop, which I'll explain in a moment. So this is hairy vetch and barley. Okay. Following this would be fall rye.
Okay.
Following the harvest of fall rye is we plant a cover crop, which then freezes in the fall. Following that, we plant corn and soy as an intercrop.
Okay.
And then after that is a pea and canola intercrop. Okay. So a highly diverse cropping system.
Okay, so this sounds to me like it's a crop rotation that people focusing on soil health really are encouraging.
Exactly. Okay. So there's a lot of soil building. There's very little nitrogen fertilizer applied, where in this rotation where we have legumes, we do not apply any nitrogen fertilizer. Okay. So that's in every phase really of this rotation, except for in the spring with the fall rye crop. Okay,
so do you want to put some order to this chaos?
Yes.
By explaining to our viewers what we're looking at?
So to put a little bit of order to this chaos, first of all, maybe I'll just explain briefly a green manure crop is a full season cover crop with the sole intention of fixing nitrogen for the remainder of the crop rotation. Okay. So these are very common in organic cropping systems, but here we are using it in a conventional crop rotation to hopefully reduce the amount of nitrogen that needs to be applied for our fall rye and following crops. So in here we have planted hairy vetch, which is a small round hard seeded legume with barley.
So that's hairy vetch.
So you can see the hairy vetch here.
The legume, right? Obviously a legume.
Correct. And then the barley, you may think, what the heck is going on with the barley? Well, in this system, we don't want the barley to produce seed, but we want to extend the period of time in which we can grow the legume. So we've actually what we call roller crimping. So we've roller crimped the barley when it was just starting to head out and flower, which has killed quite a bit of the barley, not all of it, and will allow the vetch to continue to grow until we're ready to plant the fall rye.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, now that explains it. And this hairy vetch right now, it's here's another plant with the purple flowers. It's actually the plant is longer than it appears.
Yes.
So does it grow well at this time of year?
So this plant, it starts off growing quite slow. It grows very low to the ground. And this rain that we've got this week and the reduced temperatures will allow the crop to really explode in the coming weeks. So it's July 20th, so we have at least 4 weeks until we would be interested in planting our fall rye. So there's quite a few growing days left.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And so I'm intrigued to see the rest of the rotation.
Sure. So we'll spray this out and then plant fall rye, which we'll go look at right now.
Great.
So now we're in the fall rye, which is the second crop stage in our 6th rotation. Here we have hybrid fall rye, which is the variety is called Bono. Okay. Like your favorite rock star.
My favorite band, U2. Thank you very much.
I'd never forget. So like the winter wheat, this was planted in the fall of 2020. We struggled to have a good establishment because of the dry conditions in the fall, but we had relatively good establishment here in the spring, and now we're getting kind of close to harvest.
Right, okay, so hybrid fall rye, and then after the rye, it's going to be harvested here in the next few weeks.
Yes.
And then you've got quite a window of growth left. What are you going to do with that window?
In this particular crop, so like you mentioned, we'll harvest it in a couple weeks, and we'll plant a cover crop here of faba bean, oat, and peas, a forage pea.
Okay.
Which will then grow right up until freeze up. We won't spray it or anything.
Okay. And so it would trap a lot of snow.
Yes.
And, okay, did you notice that last year that it trapped quite a bit of snow?
Last year, we didn't, purely just because we had really challenging conditions to establish a cover crop.
Okay.
So one of the challenges of cover crops, even though they have a lot of potential benefit, is ensuring you have enough moisture in the fall.
Okay.
So we definitely didn't have enough moisture to really get it going. Maybe it grew just under a foot tall.
Okay.
Whereas the year prior, we had over a foot of crop established and a really nice mulch to seed into in the spring.
Great. So I've also noticed, you've got some ergot here. And so this is a fungus which infects rye. So just wanted the viewers to see what it looks like. I'll come close to the camera with it. Maybe our camera person can focus in on that. So that's ergot, and it is actually, I think the compound in there is like LSD. It's a hallucinogen, and this used to be a real limitation to growing rye, because you couldn't clean it out of the grain. But now, because if you look at it, the fungal body is about the same size as the rye seed. But now with color sorters, it's really easy to clean it out. Mm-hmm. So it's really given rye another boost. Yeah. So I thought I would just add that into the conversation. Okay, and how do you feel about the yield potential on that rye crop?
Personally, I'm not, for the year, I think the yield potential will be okay. Yeah. I think for the potential that we would normally expect in a hybrid fall rye crop, we will not see a great yield. One of the other challenges, which you can't really see very much now, but you might notice that there's a couple different stages of the fall rye in this crop.
Like heights.
And maturities.
Right. So this is green, and then this one's brown already. It's maturing.
Yeah.
That's what you're referring to.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the greener pieces are some later tillers that came following the main stem. And one of the challenges we had here this year was when the main stem, I guess, was in the boot stage, we had a hard frost.
Oh.
And so that actually damaged those seed heads and created this early maturity in some of the heads that we see here. So it'll be interesting to see once we harvest what kind of consequences that will have.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because my thinking was all about drought and heat, because that's what you've been emphasizing in 2021. So now we've got heat, we've got drought, we've got weeds that won't die with the herbicides, and we got frost.
Yeah.
It's a pretty challenging environment
It's
here.
A very challenging environment. And smoke.
Okay, so
and the winter cereals have seen it all. So they've gone through the brunt of it.
So if these seeds could talk.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So, what do we have? Green manure, or I took your word for it. The chaotic.
Yeah, we'll see.
Manure.
Yeah.
Then rye. And then you're going to plant the cover crop.
We'll plant the cover crop, and then after the cover crop, we'll seed corn and soybean as an intercrop.
Okay. Looking forward to seeing that.
So the next crop in our sixth rotation, which is legume intensified, is the corn and soybean intercrop.
Fascinating. Really interesting. There's the soybean, there's the corn. All right. So this would raise so many questions in the viewer's mind. Why would you do it? How do you do it? And how well does it work?
Yeah, it's a novel crop, so that's also questions we're asking and questions we're trying to figure out. These are both Roundup varieties, so they can be sprayed at the same time. And we planted them at the same time with a precision planter at their standard seeding rates.
Okay.
And this is what we have. So it's a really good opportunity to diversify, but spread around some of the risk and harvest two crops off of an area.
Okay. So that's a little bit about why you would do it, a little bit about how you did it. Do you add any nitrogen fertilizer to this legume-intensive rotation?
In this particular rotation, no. In this crop phase. So while it's known that soybeans aren't the most generous nitrogen fixers, they do fix nitrogen, and since this was planted as well into a cover crop, to challenge this phase of the crop rotation, we have not applied any nitrogen fertilizer in this at all.
Okay, so you apply nitrogen to the rye.
Yes.
And then you plant that legume-intensive cover crop in the fall, and then the corn here, the intention is that it would get some of its nitrogen from the previous legume crops.
Yeah.
And then we know that the soybean is going to share perhaps a little bit of its nitrogen with the corn crop.
Yeah.
So those are its nitrogen sources, no fertilizer.
There was phosphorus fertilizer applied, so I guess a small amount of nitrogen with the MAP, but yeah.
All right. And what do you think about the couple of questions, the height of the soybeans compared to where you grow the soybeans by themselves? Any difference?
So the height here, they are very tall, and in some spots where the corn is suffering, the soybeans are almost as tall as the corn at this stage. This is, in some ways, indicates that the soybeans are experiencing some form of a stress, which allows them, or which is encouraging them to grow taller.
Yeah.
But one of the benefits of this is the pods are quite high off the ground compared to the monocrop soybean.
Yep, that's right. Because one of the problems with soybean is that when the first pods are so close to the ground, then the machine can't pick them up.
Exactly.
And so these elongate. So this would show us that there's some light limitation, because plants stretch up when there's light. Of course, the light limitation is coming from the corn, but that may be very positive. So just to answer the question, are these taller than when the soybeans grow by themselves?
Yes.
Okay.
So currently these are taller than the soybeans grown on their own.
Okay. And how do you harvest this? And what are your? I mean, clearly this is an experiment.
Yes.
But I know that one of the ways farmers harvest this is as silage.
Yeah.
But that's not your intention here.
No,
so you're looking for grain.
Our intention here is to harvest for grain. Like you said, people do use this as silage, and it has a good nutritional value.
Yeah.
But what we're looking for is grain. So what we've experimented with is harvesting the corn first, and then coming in after with more of a flex header on to collect the soybeans.
Yeah.
Although I have spoken with a number of farmers who do run a similar system that have been able to harvest everything at the same time.
Okay.
Or harvest the corn and graze the soybeans. So there's a lot of flexibility in a rotation or in a crop phase like this.
Yep. So harvesting them at the same time is quite interesting. I mean, because we've seen that with farmer innovation, right? Mm-hmm. They're harvesting peas and canola together, and lentils and flax and other things. So they've figured some of that out.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't they figure this out?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's great. Good. Very interesting. So any other comments you'd like to make before we get on to your next crop in this rotation?
No, I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that obviously in a corn plot where we're not fertilizing, we wouldn't expect the single corn yields to be equivalent necessarily to the monocrop corn, which we've heavily fertilized with nitrogen fertilizer. But comparatively, looking at the soybeans and the corn together, we'll see what their combined yield will be, but also we're monitoring what a system like this does to protect the soil.
Right.
Yeah.
And that just brings me to a question on just generally about this experiment. How are you measuring soil health, or what measurements are you doing to determine that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one of the things that's important to recognize is factors like yield, which correlates nicely to economics, are something that you can monitor every year, but soil health is more of a journey. And so what we've done in this study is we've taken a number of different baseline measurements in 2018 in the fall and the spring of 2019. So looking at soil nutrition, looking at organic matter, different soil microbes, we're looking at carbon and soil aggregate stability, amongst a number of other things. And then what we'll do is at the end of the 4 years of rotation, so at the end of 2022, we'll come back and take all of those measurements again in every single plot and see what has changed and really be able to assess how these rotations impact the below ground processes.
Okay, and just so people don't think we're like super scientists, we don't do all that ourselves.
No.
Who does it? Could you give us a little snapshot of who does that analysis?
So we're very lucky to partner with a number of different research institutions like Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and other universities, and we work with other scientists and graduate students across the prairies who will be looking at soil and weeds and disease, and it's a very large collaborative effort which allows studies like this to be possible.
And this is one of 7 locations across the prairies.
About that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, what's next?
Next and last, I believe, is the pea canola intercrop.
Oh, another intercrop.
Another intercrop.
That's going to be exciting.
All right, so here we are at the last crop of our 6th rotation, which is the main focus of the experiment that we're running with the Western Grains Research Foundation. And this is the pea canola intercrop.
Okay.
So the pea canola intercrop is more commonly maybe known as piola. That might be more familiar to some people watching. And we've grown here a yellow pea Amarillo with a clear field variety of canola. Okay. And by planting a clear field variety of canola, this allows us to use herbicides. But there have been no herbicides applied in this crop, actually.
Okay. So, what would so it looks interesting. It looks to me like there's more peas this year than canola.
Yes.
Could you explain that sort of balance and how different weather conditions might predict that or cause that?
Yeah, so one of the nice things, again, of growing this for the last 3 years is we've had different growing conditions. So this year and last year, peas were really the dominant crop.
Okay.
We seeded this pretty early, and that was, again, to take advantage of the relatively little amount of soil moisture we had. Mm-hmm. Peas do extremely well under cool conditions. Mm-hmm. And really were able to take off and did outcompete some of the canola that would have probably struggled to germinate in some of the drier conditions we had. So with our seeder that we use, we were able to plant the peas a little bit deeper than the canola. So the canola was in a drier seed bed than the peas were.
Okay. So do you have any years where there's more canola than peas than we're seeing here?
Yes. So in 2019, which was the first year of establishing this study, we had almost the reverse of this, where we had almost all canola and very few peas. And that was because we, because of environmental reasons, had to seed the crop later than you would like to ideally seed peas, and then it got very hot, so the canola did quite well and really was out competing the peas, which struggled to germinate and emerge.
Okay. So one thing, maybe before we leave this, is you said you actually planted them at 2 different depths, and you did that with 2 passes of the machine or 1 pass with the seeder?
So we did that with 1 pass of our seeder. So we have a couple different boxes and 2 different openers on our drill, and so that allowed one of the openers goes slightly deeper than the other. And so we put the canola shallower because it should be seeded shallower, whereas peas typically needs to be seeded a little deeper and it needs more moisture to emerge.
Okay. All right. So that's been a great overview of the 6 main rotations here. And this last one was the legume intensive. So we saw the green manure, the rye with the cover crop, and then the corn, soybeans, and then now with canola pea. So lots of diversity.
Yes.
This is really diverse.
This is our most diverse rotation by a long stretch.
Great. And we have 2 other things that apparently you're going to show us.
So we have, you're right. And some people might be saying, oh, well, they said 7 rotations. And even that was a lie because we have 8 rotations. But we'll just highlight 2 crops from those other rotations. So one is a perennial rotation where we're looking at the perennial grain that is referred to as kernza or intermediate wheatgrass. And then we'll also look at some organic no-till wheat.
Okay, so looking forward to that.
Yeah. So
what are we looking at here?
This is kernza. It is a perennial wheat, which is called kernza in marketing, but it's also just known as intermediate wheatgrass.
Okay. So when was this planted? We're in 2021 here.
So this was planted in the fall of 2018, and we've harvested this in 2019 and 2020, and we'll take a 3rd harvest in 2021.
Okay, and how do you harvest this?
we harvest this just the same way that you would combine wheat. Just with we use a winter stagger combine.
Okay.
We combine it obviously relatively high, while there is a lot of green material here right now. It will dry down about halfway down this plant, but the bottom material is quite green. So we cut it high, and then we will come in and mow it afterwards, which produces a lot of biomass on the surface.
Okay. And people could also graze it then. Right?
Yes.
You could have livestock graze it after harvest, and that's one of its things. So this is an experimental crop, and this Kernza was bred here at the University of Manitoba?
Yes, so this Kernza was bred by Dr. Doug Katani.
Yeah.
At the University of Manitoba, who's doing this, in collaboration with an organization in Salina, Kansas called the Land Institute.
Okay, right. Okay, so that's very exciting.
It is very exciting, yeah.
And what about nutrient management here? Is this fertilized, or, it looks reasonably healthy. How do you manage nutrients?
We fertilize this, so very similar to how you would manage a winter wheat crop.
Okay.
We apply a fertilizer, some nitrogen in the fall, depending on the weather conditions, and some in the spring.
Okay, so I've heard of Kernza grain yields going from like 200 kilograms per hectare to 1,500. Mm-hmm. What are you looking at this year? What do you think that's going to yield?
I don't know.
Closer to maybe 400?
Yeah, it'll
Okay.
still be on the low side, as we've talked extensively about. The last 3 years have been quite dry.
Yeah, okay.
So a perennial crop like Kernza is really rooting down very, very deep to access all the moisture it can.
Yeah.
But at this stage, we're seeing it start to struggle a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so last but not least, we are looking in kind of our 8th system here, which is an organic wheat rotation.
Okay.
So you might be wondering, we're in a no-till crop rotation study, how can you have organic no-till wheat? But we do, and one of the ways that we can do that is we rely on the hairy vetch barley green manure system, similar to what we showed you before in rotation 6. And then it produces this great mulch that you can see here. I'll pick some up.
Okay.
And we zero-till the wheat into it, and the mulch is able to suppress the weeds for the entire growing season.
Well, that's one thing that really shows up here is there's very, very, very few weeds. Okay, so there's your mulch.
So
that you're
here, I'll
picking
pick up a section of mulch.
Okay.
It comes up like the inter-row space really nicely, and you can see on each of these sides is really where we would have used the disc drill and cut into the mulch and planted the wheat, and the wheat comes up through those little slits in the ground.
Okay, so this, the same hairy vetch barley green manure that we saw earlier, you're growing that, but you're not using herbicides to kill it.
Yeah.
You just let it overwinter, and it winter kills.
It winter kills in this system and with this variety of vetch. So it's
Okay.
important in the system like this to make sure you're growing a variety of vetch that won't overwinter or has a little chance of overwintering. I should mention, you'll notice that when we were in that green manure earlier, the vetch was still very low, but by allowing the vetch to grow right up until the winter, last year was about waist high.
Okay.
By the time we got a killing frost, and this dies and produces a nice mat on the ground.
Okay, and then you used a different seeder to seed this. You said you
We did. So because of the nature of the mulch, if we had used the hoe drill, we would have pulled up a lot of the mulch. So we did need to use a disc drill in this type of a system to be able to slice properly through this heavy mulch. As you can see, which has done a very good job at suppressing weeds. So
Right.
as we said, this is organic. We haven't applied any fertilizer.
Okay, could you flip over the mulch and let people see the bottom? So what's interesting, about this system is that what we can see here is the barley that you blade rolled is actually closer to the soil. And then the top part is the legume. And I would just alert people watching the video that we have another video on our Natural Systems Agriculture website where we show Keith Bamford zero-tilling wheat into here.
Yes.
And what's interesting about that is that the high carbon barley is touching the soil. So if we pick another piece of mulch up, we've got Oh, there's a real good example. You can hold that. So we've got the high carbon barley essentially keeping the nitrogen-rich vetch away from the soil, which actually, we've had a number of students study this, which actually slows down the nitrogen release from the vetch and allows this not to break down as quickly and give us more mulch cover. So, okay, so that's something that people can look at. And what variety is this?
We also planted Brandon in here, and one of the things that you might notice is that this crop looks quite a bit more green than the conventional wheat, and that really is due to the mulch that we have here conserving quite a bit of moisture at the early part of the spring.
Right, so moisture conservation. Good. Yeah. So this is probably a question that you maybe don't have an answer for yet, but what are you going to seed here after you harvest the wheat, or what happens here next year? Okay. What are the options?
So one of the options would be we could try to zero-till into this again, but that would be really reliant on how much this mulch decomposes and how much that it is able to suppress weeds. But probably what we will come in and do is we might have to assess what weeds are growing here in the fall, but we'll do some tillage and maybe plant a legume, or a pulse into this next year.
Okay. Another thing that I might suggest, our former technician who really pioneered this system, Keith Bamford, what he would suggest we do is maybe seed fall rye in here.
Oh, yeah.
This fall zero-till it in. Or if it... what Keith often did is, if the mulch was starting to break down and weeds were going to break through, he would till it and then plant oats the next year, because there's still lots of nitrogen. I don't think we need to go to a legume yet.
Oh, yeah.
But anyways, thanks for that. So,
and one of the benefits about the dry year is that there has been very little decomp in this mulch, so there is quite a bit of biomass here.
You know, we've done this many years, and I would have to agree that the amount of the intactness of this mulch is quite impressive.
Yeah.
So, any final comments about any of the rotations that we've seen today?
I don't have any final comments, but yeah, I just want to, it's been great to grow all these different crops and to see how they are producing and performing in such a dry year, and really get an idea of the different capabilities of the different rotations.
Okay, so thank you very much for taking the time to explain the rotations in such detail. Thank you to the viewers for taking the time to watch our YouTube video on this, and I think it's fair to say we wish everyone a good year.
Yes.
And a good harvest.
Yep.
And get vaccinated, stay healthy.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Bye-bye.